Hello, everybody. It's Peter McLaughlin, Blue Sky Hypnosis. Welcome to another edition of Friday Live at 5. So glad that you're here. Holidays are coming up, obviously, and so I thought that we would do today a spiritual film analysis, what I'm calling this spiritual film analysis of the classic film It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed. And today we're going to just kind of talk about this, dissect it, and really kind of focus in on what I see as the spiritual aspects of this film. Now, before we go there, standard disclaimer, not that we need it today necessarily, but I'm a life coach and a hypnotist, not a doctor, not a psychologist. Also, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this movie before and you've never heard about this movie before and you want to be surprised by watching it, then don't watch this broadcast, because I'm going to be talking about things that would obviously give away aspects of the plot, might spoil a few aspects of it in that sense. If you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to share those. That's what makes this such an interesting activity for me, and I think for the people that join in. It always takes the conversation in a different direction. It makes it a conversation and not just a monologue going in one direction. Also, if you have any suggestions for future broadcasts, please feel free to do that, because I am always interested in what you guys have to say. So without further ado, I thought that what I would do is start off by talking about what I discovered about the origins of this film, because I think the origins of the film help us to understand a little bit better what's embedded inside of it and kind of the impact that it continues to have upon people. So this movie was made in 1946, the year after World War II ended, which is remarkable that it has really, truly stood the test of time in that sense. People can watch this movie multiple times. I know I have. In fact, I just watched it a couple of nights ago with my wife, and we were both, had notepads and pens out, and we're really looking at it through this lens of what is actually, if you will, sort of hidden or embedded in the film. What kind of subliminal messages are being communicated in a variety of ways, which really good filmmakers do. And you can watch a film sometimes multiple times and not see these things, but they are clearly, well, from the perspective of a hypnotist, impacting your subconscious mind, therefore impacting your emotions on this level that your conscious mind has no awareness of. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing in on. So, film was made in 1946. It was directed by Frank Capra, starred Jimmy Stewart, and one of the interesting things about this is that it came from a short story by a man named Philip Van Doren Stern. It was originally called The Greatest Gift. And when I read about the genesis of Van Doren Stern and how he came to write this, he claims it came to him at night in a dream, fully formed. And the next morning, he just sat down and either typed or wrote out this short story that he called The Greatest Gift. He tried to sell this and wasn't able to sell it, so he printed off 200 copies and he sent it out with his Christmas cards that year. And within a period of time, I don't know if it was months or years, a film studio actually bought the rights to this film. And they hired a whole bunch of writers, and they weren't able to do much with it. And they sold it to, I believe, Frank Capra and his production studio. They brought in different writers. They took what they liked from the old scripts, and they began to add to it. Now, there are a couple of stories about how Jimmy Stewart became involved in this project, and I'm not sure which one to believe, but one thing is for sure, that he requested combat duty in World War II. So Jimmy Stewart was a star in the, let's say, mid to late 1930s and into the early 1940s. And when World War II broke out, he requested that he join the Army Air Corps. It wasn't the Air Force at that point, and he wanted to go into combat. Now, Hollywood and the US government didn't want a high-profile actor getting killed, but he insisted on this, and he became a pilot of a bomber flying very, very dangerous combat missions over Germany. And I think we can all agree that people who enter, soldiers, other troops and whatnot that enter into combat are almost always profoundly affected by this experience. Now, the one story that I read about his return from World War II was he wasn't even sure that he wanted to go back into the movies again. And I can only imagine what that must have been like, being in the thick of this pretty heavy fighting in World War II, dropping bombs on cities and being shot at, and his friends being killed in other planes and so forth. He wasn't sure that he wanted to do another movie. And he already knew Frank Capra. They had made films together before. Frank Capra actually served in the US military using his skills as a filmmaker. Frank Capra showed him the script, and Jimmy Stewart apparently immediately agreed to do it. And one of the things that I find so beautiful is that right up until the end of his life, Jimmy Stewart said that this, It's a Wonderful Life, was his favorite film. And I think the things we're going to be talking about today will help to understand why that was so for him. Again, you make a movie like this. It didn't even do really well at the box office, apparently, when it first came out. But here it's still affecting people deeply, 70 plus odd years later. And I think it has to do with the core of the story and what's embedded in it. And I would say that the story is a spiritual, well, it's obviously a spiritual story. There are definitely religious sort of overtones to it, but I think it goes even deeper than that. And so I kind of feel like, I've written down some themes of this film that I want to talk about today. I'm not exactly sure what order to go in, so I think I'm just going to sort of jump into it. On this channel, on this Friday Live, we talk about spirit guides. Now, a spirit guide is a non-physical entity who is kind of like a coach or an advisor. A religious person or Christian might call it a guardian angel. But I think, it's obvious that being on this planet in a human form is not easy. It's really difficult. And I don't think that we were sent here with no help whatsoever. One day, in deep hypnosis meeting with my guides, I was asking, what is up with this place? What is up with this earth? Why is it so hard? And what they said to me was, when we put you in the canoe of life, we gave you a paddle. It's not our fault you didn't use the paddle. And in this metaphor, the paddle, which was lying on the bottom of the canoe between my feet, the paddle was a metaphor for a spirit guide, for this non-physical assistance that exists for all of us. Just most of us have never even heard of this concept. And if we have, we don't really know how to access that. In this film, It's a Wonderful Life, for those of you who've watched it or are familiar with it, George Bailey is played by Jimmy Stewart. He is the protagonist. He is the hero. And he reaches this point of absolute, total, and utter desperation. All of his dreams, all the things that he had wanted to do in his life, and all the things he didn't want to do were kind of reversed. So he didn't want to work in the family business, which was a savings and loan. He thought it was a dumpy little business and he didn't want to do it. And he ended up devoting his life to it. He wanted to go to college and he didn't. He wanted to join the military when World War II broke out, and he couldn't because his ear had been damaged when he was a child. He wasn't able to go on his honeymoon that he had saved up all of this money for. There were all of these. He wanted to become a millionaire. He wanted to go to college. He wanted to build great big things. He wanted to leave the town that he lived in, Bedford Falls. He didn't get to do any of those things. And at the sort of climax of the movie, his bank is, due to a mistake that was made, is under threat of being closed, and he is under threat of being arrested. He's turned to the one place he thought he could turn to get money, to get a loan to keep the bank going, and the person turned him down flat. And he was drinking, and he was basically suicidal. He was going to throw himself off a bridge into the water. And this man appears to him named Clarence, and Clarence is purported to be his guardian angel. I would say his spirit guide. So I think that at the core of this movie is the concept of a spirit guide. They use the term guardian angel, but I would say that that is totally interchangeable with the concept of a spirit guide. And through a variety of methods, Clarence helps George Bailey, to shift his perspective on his life. And he helps him shift his perspective on his life by giving him an alternative experience. The alternative experience that he gives him is, here's what Bedford Falls and all the people you know and love, this is what would have happened had you never existed in the first place. And by giving George this experience, no one has to lecture George and saying, look, this is insane. You shouldn't be killing yourself. Your life has meaning. Your life has value. He gets it. And he gets it in spades because he essentially has a first-person experience of this alternate reality. Call it maybe an alternate timeline if he had never been born. There's at least another film that pertains to Christmas and the holidays, which was written by Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol, that if you think of it, it does the exact same thing. Instead of a spirit guide, it's called The Ghosts of Christmas Past, Present, and Future. And these ghosts show Scrooge, the main character of the film, and kind of an anti-hero or the bad guy. They don't tell him he's being a bad guy. They just show him his life and the people in it from a different perspective. And from these different perspectives that have to do with timelines, Scrooge changes himself. And I would say that the quintessence of the work that I do with my clients one-on-one is helping them understand their current lifetime through different lenses, seeing it, experiencing it, feeling it from the perspective of what's happened in the past, maybe even in a past lifetime. Sometimes experiencing it from the perspective of their future self, a future version of this person who has solved the problems that they're dealing with right now. Maybe from a spiritual perspective, what their higher self or their soul chose for this lifetime. Maybe from a karmic perspective, where perhaps the client who's been harmed in this lifetime was actually the one doing harm in a past lifetime. And it's from this changing or shifting of perspective from the first person experience. In other words, you're not reading, oh, you're a bad person if you do this, and you're a good person if you do that. No. Person's having their own experiences. And from having their own experiences, they transform, they change on the inside in a very profound way. And I believe that this is exactly the story of George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. So I want to jump in here. I see there are a number of comments, and I want to see if there's one that we can address right away and make this more of a conversation. Okay, let's see what we got here. AW, hello, AW, and Marie Hogan. Legal Eagle 44, you're back. Hello, glad you're back. Glad you're back. Colleen Bailey, good to see you. Shout out Dara O'Sullivan. Awesome to have you here, my friend. Colleen Bailey, it's great to see all of these folks. Wonderful that you guys are here. All right, everybody's kind of talking to each other here, which is awesome. Colleen Bailey is saying World War II vets are very different than others. My dad enlisted at 17. Yeah, I mean, it's John F. Kennedy pulled strings to get into the military. He had all of these medical conditions that would have precluded him from being in the military. And instead of later generations that were pulling strings to get out, some of these people, like Jimmy Stewart, for example, and JFK, for example, were pulling strings to get in. It sounds like your father at 17, who knows, maybe his parents, your grandparents had to sign a waiver or something so he could go in the military. Yeah, you're right. Totally different time. Let's see here. Scrolling down. Here we go. AW saying, the moment where the druggist, Mr. Gower, hits George over the head, but George helps him and they become lifelong friends. Yeah, that because I watched it recently. And maybe what I'll do now is I'll get into one of these themes that I had talked about, which is the theme of water. So water is suffused, the concept and the visual and the sound of water is suffused throughout this film. In the beginning of the film, George is a child and he's with his younger brother, Harry, and they're sledding down a hill. And then it comes down to the hill and it goes onto a frozen pond. And Harry, for whatever reason, is going across the pond. Maybe he goes farther than the other boys did, and he breaks through the ice and he goes into the water. George immediately runs out, dives in the water to save his brother. And by going into such cold water, his ear becomes infected. I think it's his left ear becomes infected. And later, when George is still, a boy basically, and he's working at a drugstore, there's this mistake that happens, and the druggist, the owner of the store, Mr. Gower, slaps him in the ear a few times, and it exacerbates the condition in his ear. And because George has this, he calls it a trick ear, when World War II breaks out and all the men are going off to war, he isn't able to do that. And it is another in his long list of things that before he has his transformative experience, he believes it's kind of just another thing, another opportunity, another desire, something else that he wanted to happen that didn't happen, and that adds up kind of to a life in his mind as a failure. And his brother, the one he rescued, does go to war. He's a pilot, and he ends up winning the Congressional Medal of Honor. Okay, so that's what AW is referring to there. Let's see what else we have here. AW says, I watched the film again last night. There are some dark moments in there that I forgot. Yeah, it's what's really amazing about this. And I watched some of the bonus features where Capra is talking about Jimmy Stewart. And he's so right. The Jimmy Stewart is able to handle the lighthearted moments, but he's also really able to handle these darker moments of a man that is going through an absolute emotional, spiritual, and mental crisis. Okay, so Dara O'Sullivan is saying he also watched it last night, the swimming pool incident. So he's referring to a dance that's held at the local high school, and this is kind of like a meeting again of Mary, who becomes George's wife, and George. Now, they knew each other as children, but now they're meeting again, and Mary is graduating from high school, and George is a few years out of high school. And they're dancing in the high school gymnasium. And installed recently was a pool underneath the floor. So the floor kind of moves back, and there's a pool there. And there's the principal, and he's sort of crowing, bragging about how they didn't have to build a second building because now they have the pool and they have the conventional gymnasium all in one. Well, there's a prankster who gets the key to the floor, and he turns it. And while George and Mary are dancing, the floor begins to open. And the opening is to their back, and they're dancing back and they're dancing forward, and they're dancing back and they're dancing forward, and they're getting closer and closer to this chasm, which is water underneath it. And what's interesting about this scene is two things came to my mind. And I should have said this at the beginning, but this is all from my perspective with my wife as well. Her name is Mary, kind of cool. It's us looking at this, us talking about it when we rewatched it a couple of nights ago, and also me really thinking about this a lot. I wrote about this a few years ago. It's going to be in a book that I'm going to be publishing at some point. So one of the thoughts I had about them dancing back and forth is that they are getting closer and closer to the precipice. They are getting closer and closer to catastrophe. What's interesting about it is that the kid that wanted to get back at George, the prankster, by opening this thing up, was probably wanting to humiliate him or hurt him. And it really looks like, oh man, it's way down there to the water, and they're wearing, black tie tuxedos and whatnot, and it looks like it's going to be a disaster. What's really interesting about it is that ultimately George and Mary do fall back and into the water. And as soon as that happens, it's like a cue for other kids, other students to start on purpose diving into the water in their full prom attire. And even some of the adults and the principal end up diving in. So what would appear to be at first blush a catastrophe turns into this kind of joyful communal incident. And I think that is sort of a foreshadowing, if you will, of the larger meaning of the play. At the end of this play, when catastrophe has struck, when the bank has reached this point of failure, the bank examiner is there. The police are there, ready to arrest George. At that moment of catastrophe, in the same way that all these people joyfully dive into the pool and join George and Mary, at the end of this screenplay, at the end of this movie, all of the townspeople, all of these people George has known his whole life, and he's helped many of them in a variety of ways. They all come pouring into his living room, and they're dumping off money. And he receives so much money that he's able to easily handle this problem with the bank and then some. And I think that this scene that you're talking about, Dara, with the pool and this what looks like imminent catastrophe, is, as I say, a sort of foreshadowing of the ultimate moment of the plot at the end, where everybody joins him and they're all in the pool together. They're all in the water together, which I think is absolutely beautiful, and is something that I probably have seen this movie like, 10 times before. And this time I was really trying to watch for these things, and I think that is something that probably was done on purpose. If it wasn't, it's just one of those beautiful moments that creates a parallel. Okay. Swimming pool, that was awesome. Okay, Legal Eagle 44. Mr. B, after watching the movie, I considered how my own life has a purpose. I saw a sense of belonging and community, the gift of friendship, something I missed early in life but am making up for. Gosh, that is so beautiful. We have to give a round of applause for that. Yeah, I mean, throughout this movie, one of the other themes is money. So even as a small child, George keeps saying, I wish to be a millionaire. And, he's talking about wanting to make it big in a way that many of us do. I've been there. And I think we somehow think that money is going to solve all of our problems. Money is going to create the feelings of respect and of happiness and of comfort and of satisfaction and of achievement that we all desire. And I think some of the most depressed people in the world are people who have become famous, people who have become wealthy, get there and realize, wait a minute, I'm the same person I was now as the person I was when I didn't have any money and I wanted all of that money. And now what do I do? Before, at least I could strive for this, and now I don't even have that. At the end of this, in this denouement, at the end of this screenplay, when all of these people are coming and giving to George all of this money, he didn't go out and earn it. They're bringing it to him. His brother, who had won the Congressional Medal of Honor, toasts him and he says to George Bailey, the richest man in the world, or the richest man in town. I can't remember what he said, but he's obviously talking about a different kind of riches. And in one of the earlier Friday Lives that we did, we talked about the soul of money. And I was pointing out how there's different kinds of wealth. When we say the word wealth, I think most of us think about, coins and cash and checks and digits in your bank account. And the trappings of wealth, like expensive cars and homes and traveling and clothes and so forth. But there's also your health. Oh my God. Your health is an enormous source of wealth. Your time, how much time do you have? And the health to enjoy that time. And certainly your family and the richness of those relationships, certainly the richness of your friends and your acquaintances and the community in which you live. And this movie really is kind of like, I was saying to my wife, it's almost like if you've ever seen the movie Platoon. I know it's way separate in terms of time. That was 1986, 40 years later. And it's a war film, and this one is a, sort of a feel-good Christmas film. But in the movie Platoon, the protagonist, Chris Taylor is his name, is torn between two sergeants. One is kind of the dark sergeant, and the one who is a badass, and he's a really good soldier, and he doesn't take any crap, and he knows what he's talking about, and following him looks like, well, that might keep me alive. And the other soldier is this empathic, compassionate one. And I think in this film, the dark one is, and I have a picture of him right here someplace, the dark one is Mr. Potter. So Mr. Potter is this kind of evil banker. And it seems like in our, not seems like it is, let me get this out of my face here. In our history, in the 1920s, 1929 stock market crash and the depression of the 1930s, bankers, from what I read, were absolutely reviled and hated, foreclosing on the family farm and so forth. And I think bankers now, too big to fail and all these other things, I think we're kind of right back there again. So Mr. Potter is a banker. He's the one that represents kind of the in the platoon terms, the dark sergeant, the evil one. In my opinion, he also represents death. At one point, Mr. Potter makes an offer to George Bailey. George Bailey is making about $2,000 some odd a year. Now, this is 1946, remember. And he offers him a job to work for him, Mr. Potter, for $20,000 a year. And George is sorely tempted to take this offer. I couldn't find a place where I could get the screenshot. It didn't quite work because I was using a DVD and I just couldn't get it. But on this desk, and maybe you can see the back of it here, but I don't know if you can see this cursor. It's underneath George's right arm. There's actually a death head, a skull, like the SS, the Nazis had on their insignia. So but it's very, very small, and it's kind of fleeting. And unless you're looking very closely, you can't see it. So I think that Potter represents death in a way. And by offering George this job at this huge amount of money, George knows that in order to take that job, he'd basically have to sell his soul to somebody that he despises, someone that he doesn't believe in, someone that he knows is out to essentially ruin other people for the advancement of himself. And I think on the other side of this coin, sort of the good sergeant, if you will, is George's father. Peter Bailey is his name. And his mission in life wasn't to make money. His mission in life was to provide a bulwark against Potter and to support people, help them buy their own homes, and people working together in a communal way. By putting their money into the savings and loan, using some of that money to support this one, that money gets paid back and supports that one, and so forth. And I think this whole movie is almost like this struggle between these two. One represents, kind of material gain, just for the sake of material gain, and maybe even death, because even the death of a dream, like if George had taken that, his whole reason for being probably would have died, the way he views himself and everything else. And then on the other side, there's George's father that I think represents kind of the lighter side. And then the other interesting thing is that, as I mentioned before, when George reaches this crescendo when the bank is about to fail, he can't come up with the $8,000, he goes to Potter and asks for it. And I think that's also kind of interesting as well. That seemed like his only option. Who has a lot of money? Potter. I'm going to go to him. The same George that was saying he wanted to be a millionaire, he wanted to kick the dust off his shoes of this one-horse town and so forth. All right, let's see what else we have here in the questions, comments. Thanks so much, Legal Eagle. It's good to see you too. Hello, JW Fat. Shout out to you. Good to see you here. See, Elizabeth Ruiz says, hello, I love all your live hypnosis before I go to sleep. You sound so much like the man that I love and miss from the States. You're amazing. Oh, thanks so much, Elizabeth. Sincerely appreciate that. What else? Yes. Colleen Bailey. Jimmy Stewart did an amazing job as George Bailey. You can see it's more than an ordinary role for him. Absolutely. You can see, can't you? It's so true. And I have to wonder, coming back from the thick of World War II, you know, flying over the skies of Germany and going through what he went through and carrying that all inside him. I mean, it seems to me that he was working through his own demons with this. And that perhaps in playing this role, he put some of his demons to rest. Perhaps in a way, he was reborn. So I want to go back to the concept of water, because we kind of left that hanging. So we had the pond in the beginning, when George rescues his brother Harry, who broke through the ice. We have the pool that Dara was talking about, where the gymnasium floor is opening up, and they're getting closer and closer to the precipice, and finally they fall in. There's also the wedding. So when George and Mary get married, it's raining, and then at this point at which George is wanting to kill himself, it's snowing. So there's more water. And he goes to a bridge and he looks down into this turbulent water of the river below. And this is where he's thinking he's going to throw himself into that water and he's going to kill himself in the water. And again, it's water, water, water. So when I'm thinking about water in relation to this movie, I think of a couple of things. Number one is I learned that in an esoteric sense, there's this concept of, in order to swim across the sea of consciousness, one must be like a fish. And in this book that I read, they were saying, this is why Jesus is represented as a fish. You know, you drive down the street, drive down the road, you see the car in front of you, and it has like that really simple fish on the bumper. Well, the fish is the age of Pisces, and Pisces is the age that we just ended in 2012 when we began the age of Aquarius. And so that age of Pisces was when Jesus came, a fish, and you must be a fish to swim across the sea of consciousness. And maybe I'm adding too much into this, but all the water in all of the critical scenes, to me, says partly that this concept of swimming across the sea of consciousness, one must be a fish. The other one, obviously, is that whole concept of baptism, of being cleansed, so that you can be born anew. And I know I mean, to me, that's exactly what happens in this film. That George is spending the first part of the film sacrificing. He's doing things that he doesn't want to do. And there's a fair amount of resentment in all of that. In other words, he's living a life he doesn't really want to be living. Let me get rid of Potter here. We don't need to see him anymore. And then he moves into, then it moves into death. So there's a scene right before George's father dies and before George gets married that they refer to as the last meal, which to me sounds a lot like, the final meal, which sounds a lot like the Last Supper in a way. Who's it the Last Supper for? Well, George's father dies shortly thereafter, and that's what necessitates George having to take over the savings and loan. Is it also kind of the death of some of his dreams? Possibly. I think there's a bigger death that's unfolding over a period of time. Let me explain myself. So bear with me, this has a point. A number of years ago, my daughter was very, very sick. She was maybe 15 years old, and she was sick for a couple of years. And I did some hypnosis with her multiple times. And one time we did hypnosis, we met with her spirit guide, and I had her ask her spirit guide, what has to happen for her to become healthy? And the answer she received was, get this, as a parent of a 15-year-old daughter, death. I'm like, whoa. Okay, ask the guy what they mean by death. You must die. Whoa. I'm just going like, okay, thank God I've got a lot of experience because I know that's not what it means. Ask the guide, what part of you has to die? Answer, the old part of you has to die so that a new part of you can be born, so that a new part of you can live. And I would say that there is a period of time from the final meal until the transformation at the end, where parts of George are actually dying. And the interesting thing about this is that, and those of you who've watched this movie will recognize this right away. And this isn't a great screen grab, but it was the best one I could get. But this is George's Uncle Billy. And you can see here, kind of blurry, is a raven. Right there. So the raven appears right after George's father dies for the first time, I believe it is. It's either right before he dies or right after. And when Billy loses the money, when he loses the $8,000, that sends them into this spiral of potential absolute disaster. When Billy comes back into the bank, the raven actually lands on him, which it hasn't landed on anybody up until that point. And if you look up the meaning of raven, and I think, I'm not sure if I can find it here right away, but if you look up the meaning of raven, it is associated with death. And it also means a kind of renewal. Because the old has to die to make way for the new. Even our cells, trillions of cells in your body, you've got cells that are dying all the time. And those cells that die make way for the new cells. Every 5 to 6 years, you have a whole new body. But you couldn't if the old cells didn't die. So I think that there's something in here about death and then renewal, or death and rebirth. And, without going too far overboard, this season is about that very same concept. December 21st, the winter solstice, in just a few days, marks the least amount of light in the northern hemisphere. And from what I have read, according to the human eye, for about 3 days, from the 21st to the 24th, it appears that the sun doesn't move. In other words, it doesn't get darker and it doesn't get brighter. Only on the 25th does the sun begin to rise again in the northern hemisphere and start bringing back more light, bringing back more life. And I think that this is kind of what George goes through this sort of death, with this chaos and catastrophe. And then, because of the efforts of Clarence, his spirit guide, and Clarence, if you look that up, it means clear or illuminated or light. Because of the light and the experience he has with his guide, he is sort of awakened, he is sort of reborn into a new life. The George that comes back from his alternate timeline experience is a completely different George than went into that experience. And I have a picture that I wanted to pop up here for a second. So this is another screen grab from the film. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here. So this is after George has seen Clarence struggling, help me, help me. And George dives into the ocean, into the river, not to kill himself, but to rescue. He's not really rescuing Clarence, he's being rescued. And afterwards, they're drying out. And this scene I thought was really interesting because there's a clothesline here that separates diagonally George on the bottom from Clarence on the top. And you have to ask yourself, why would a filmmaker just shove a clothesline in the middle of a scene like this unless there was a purpose to it? And so I immediately thought, oh, it's sort of higher because Clarence, as a spirit guide, is is arguably a little bit more evolved at this moment. He's not in a crisis, an emotional crisis. He isn't thinking about killing himself. He's here to save or help George. So he represents, in my little way of looking at this, the kind of ascended position, while George is still trapped below the horizon of what separates the light from the dark. All right, we can get rid of this now. Boom, boom. Okay, let me see what else we have in here. Colleen Bailey says, who would put a pool under a gym floor? I actually think that there are places that do that. And I think the principal actually said in the movie, he said, look at this. We didn't have to build a separate building. We've got one building, presumably one heating bill, lights, blah, 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 the land, the footprint, but we actually have two functions with it. So it kind of makes sense. And I think there are probably high schools out there that have that, although I haven't seen one myself. Okay, here's John saying, hi from the UK. Sorry, I haven't seen the movie, but will enjoy hearing your ideas. Glad to have you here, John, and maybe you'll like to see the movie afterwards. Colleen is saying, Peter, you could have been an English professor. Well, I could have played one on television, maybe not a real one, but thank you for that. Yeah, and Colleen is saying, I think George wanted freedom more than anything else. He felt trapped by his small town. Oh, this is awesome. Dara says, I think George was plagued by thinking he could physically escape that which was within him. He wanted to get on the train. He tried to escape with a drink. Then he brought the guardian angel to the pub, which is pretty funny. But yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think that's back to that concept of money. If we feel like we have low self-esteem on the inside, if we feel like people don't respect us, if we feel like, we're not good enough, then I think sometimes money, especially if we acquire money, that from that perspective of this place of pain looks like a solution. It feels like, hey, if I had money, then I would respect myself. Then other people would respect me. Then my self-esteem would be higher. Then I would feel more relaxed. I'd feel more calm, or maybe even I would feel free. And this is the trap, isn't it? I mean, because so many people you hear of become famous, they become wealthy, and then they go kill themselves, or they're addicted to, all kinds of drugs and alcohol and whatnot. So this kind of gets to that, one of those things that I wrote down in the kind of promo piece that I put together for this, and that is the Hermetic principle, the Hermetic Law of Correspondence, which states as above, so below, as within, so without. And I think that concept is illustrated beautifully in this wonderful movie. George is in this kind of tight place where he's resentful that he's done all these things for other people and he hasn't had his dreams fulfilled. He has not had a satisfactory transaction in life. Everything has not gone his way. That's his opinion. That's his attitude. And he resents it. And at the end of the movie, after he's had this alternative timeline, he steps into this immense gratitude for his life exactly as it is, exactly as it has been. And what happens to us when we go from being pissed off, depressed, angry, to being grateful? We go from a very, very low vibration, a very low vibratory energy that's associated with all of those negative emotions and is associated with physical unwellness. And we rise up to a higher frequency, a frequency of gratitude, of love, of joy, of forgiveness, of companionship, of compassion. And because of the law of correspondence, as within, so without, what happens immediately when George changes? His life changes. He doesn't really have to do much of anything. He comes back And the cops are there to arrest him. The bank examiner is there. The press is there to humiliate him with a story. And he's like, haha, I'm home. This is so great. Look at this lovely old house that he hated before. Kids, where are you kids? That he was irritated with before. Why do we have so many kids? You know, he had his life back and he was flying high. So his vibration comes up to meet that, as within, so without. And almost immediately his exterior circumstances match that high vibration. All these people pouring in to give him money, to thank him for everything he had done for them that he didn't even think to ask them. My wife pointed out how it was his wife, Mary, who went to the town and said, you know, George is in trouble. We're in trouble. We need your help. And people came out of the woodwork. It was like one of those old-fashioned, you know, fire brigades where the whole town turns out to pass buckets to put out the fire or to raise somebody's barn. But yeah, Dara, I think you make a really important point here. And I think that it is consistent with this Hermetic principle of correspondence. As within, so without. If we want our exterior life to change, we have to change the interior life. Our exterior life is a perfect reflection of our interior life. We have control over our interior life. And his spirit guide, and your spirit guide too, can show you how to get control of your interior life. And I'm telling you right now, man, I mean, we make up stuff constantly. 12 people watch a car accident, you get 12 different stories about the car accident, right? Because it's all coming through your filter. We're making meaning out of stuff all the time. The person on the roller coaster says, oh my God, it's terrifying. I never want to do that again. And the person sitting right next to them like, hooray, this is the greatest experience of my life. They're both having the same experience at the same time, in the same place, in the same fashion. And they make 180-degree different interpretations of what just happened. So when you are able to see things a la George Bailey, a la Scrooge, when you're able to see things from a different perspective, it changes the filter through which you engage with the world. Your story about your life changes. And when your story changes, you change. Amazing stuff. Okay. Colleen Bailey, this movie gave me the opportunity to think of all the lives I have touched. Amazing, right? Amazing. The people who, you know, the man who wrote this, Philip Van Dorenstern, the man who shot it, Frank Capra, Jimmy Stewart, I'm assuming Donna Reed, and the other members of the cast, they're all gone. They're all deceased. But they are still impacting me. They are still impacting you. What a gift to the world. And Philip Van Dorenstern's short story that came to him in a dream, he called The Greatest Gift. Yeah, 100% agree there. Elizabeth Ruiz, you're so right that the real true meaning of wealth are all your loved ones around you. Time, happiness, and most of all, our health. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And it kind of reminds me of Dr. Seuss's, what was it called? The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, kind of like Scrooge. And he steals, you know, he comes down the chimneys of the people, the Who's, and he steals all of their Christmas trees. He steals, all of their presents on Christmas Eve, and he steals all of their food that they were going to feast with the next day. And he sits up on top of Mount Crumpet and he looks down and he's like, ha 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 ha. You know, now the Who's are going to be just as miserable as I am. And yet they still come together and they're singing songs and they're playing games and they're one as kind of a community of love. And he's completely flummoxed by this. And he learns in that moment that happiness doesn't come from the outside, it comes from the inside. But I think we have to learn these lessons over and over again. I'm putting myself in that boat too, because it's so tempting to say, hey, if I just get that Tesla Model S, then I'm going to be happy. And you will be for 2 weeks. Okay. Marie Hogan, water can be very, very healing. Yeah, I mean, you know, think of how water dissolves and washes away all manner of, you know, things that smell bad, that look bad, that kind of get in the way. You know, it's like the universal solvent for washing away dirt. But, you know, religion has used it with that concept of washing away sin. washing away heaviness. Yeah, really good, really good. Yeah, the Legal Eagle is talking about the Jesus fish. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Yeah. Dara O'Sullivan. In the Tower of London, the ravens never leave the grounds until a monarchy is no more. Yeah, I went to the Tower of London many years ago on my first trip to England, and took a tour of the tower, and they were saying, here are the ravens, and they're always here. And it's interesting because that's where a lot of executions took place, and the raven is associated with death. Fascinating, right? Natalie Peugeot. Hi, Peter. Thank you a million times for your hypnosis sessions on YouTube. It is so helping me. Have you ever thought of making a session to meet your guardian angel? Oh, how I would love that. That's interesting. I mean, if you go to my YouTube channel and you just search on Spirit Guide, I believe that you will meet essentially the same entity. May not have wings on their back, but they're serving the same purpose. So if you haven't tried that, give that a shot and let me know what you think. And thank you for the shout out and the compliment. Really appreciate it. Okay. JW Fat. Peter, you also use water in your videos. Why is that? Okay, really simple reason why I do that is that when I use music, and I do use music in a number of the videos too, people will complain. They'll say, oh, I hate the sound of a piano. Another person says, how come you don't make videos with a piano sound? Some other person says, that sounded too much like this film, Twin Peaks. This one, and then another person says about the same thing. Oh, I loved it. So there's a lot of contentious back and forth with people getting irritated by the music. It's a very personal thing, music. And I just thought, all right, well, it rains everywhere, doesn't it? Doesn't everybody hear the rain? And maybe most people have been near the seaside and have heard the sound of the ocean. And most people have been next to a creek or a brook or a stream or a river. And so I thought if I use that, surely that will appeal to more people. It's more benign in that way. And I think that's true, although some people have complained and said, that rain is too fast, that rain is too slow, the drops sound too big, the drops sound too small, stuff like that. Well, you can't please all the people all the time. So with a number of the videos, I might have it with music, I might have another one with, say, ocean sounds. And then another video, I might have different kind of music and rain, so forth. So it's just a way of kind of mixing things up. Plus, I think when we are exposed to nature, and science has borne this out, it affects our mood. It improves our mood to be exposed to nature. Now, being exposed to nature, I don't think just means seeing nature. It can also mean hearing nature. So this is a way of adding that natural element that actually has a sound to it into the picture that can help people relax and go deeper. So that's why. Thanks for the question. AW. He seems reluctant to marry Mary in the beginning, even though they are obviously perfect for each other. Hey, she's got the root beer. This is awesome. Way to go. She's got that little, on her icon there, she's got A&W root beer. That's her nickname here, is root beer. Yes, he does seem reluctant to marry her. And I think that's because, in my wife's words, he is kind of selfish. I mean, he's helping everybody, because his nature is to help, but he's got things he wants to do for himself. He wants to go to college. He wants to see the world. He wants to build things. He wants to get out of this little town. He doesn't want to work in the bank. He's got definite ideas of what he wants. And I think he looks at Mary and he says, if I get married to her, that's it. I'm never leaving this place. And so that scene where they're both on the phone together talking to their friend Wainwright, Sam Wainwright, he's somewhere else, and they're talking to him, and they have to kind of get close to hear Sam on this, the old-fashioned phone. You can see Jimmy Stewart. He does such an amazing job of I don't want to do this. I kind of want to do this. I don't want to do this. I really kind of want to do this. And he's just sort of, without saying anything, you can see what's going on in his mind as his natural attraction to her, his natural love for her, overpowers these other things he thinks he really wants to do. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a really important moment in the film. And I think that's part of his resentment, moving forward is when he comes home, when Uncle Billy has lost the $8,000 and he says, what do we have to live in this old crummy house for anyway? And why do we have all of these kids? And he might as well have just said, and why did I even marry you? I mean, the screenwriters didn't put that in, but that's probably something that was in his mind, not because he didn't love her and he didn't love his kids. Obviously he did, but because he's in this, all of that resentment has bubbled up to the top now from this crisis that has occurred. All right. Legal 44. I'm flying on a high vibrational disc because of this live. Thank you, Mr. Blue Sky. Thank you. Let's see here. Yeah, Colleen Bailey. That occurred to me too. That occurred to me too. That elements of George's struggle, elements of his life, are similar to the story of Jesus. And it is a Christmas film, which kind of brings up another point, and that is bells. So the overt use of bells in this film is every time a bell is rung, Clarence, the guardian angel, says to George, an angel gets his wings. And so we have that aspect in it, and at the end of the film, a bell starts ringing on the Christmas tree to indicate that Clarence got his wings through his work with George. But there's other concept to bells, I think, which is, and this came from my wife, that a bell makes its sound by reverberating. And George's actions, in ways he didn't understand until he had the experience with Clarence in the alternate timeline, reverberated, like a stone in a still pond where the ripples go in all directions. His actions reverberated in ways he didn't understand. And Colleen Bailey was saying, and I think, Colleen, you were a nurse or have been a nurse for a long time, and you were saying, this makes me realize how many lives I've touched. Well, it gives you maybe the tip of the iceberg. I don't even think you have a full comprehension, and how could you, of how many lives you've touched. And everyone on this Friday Live right now, there are things that you have done, and it could have just been a look. It could have been a comment on YouTube. It could have been something you offhandedly did for a friend that has reverberated, that has lived through time. Just like this film, I said all of the people who were involved in making it, their physical bodies are deceased, but the film is reverberating like a bell through time, which is a really wonderful image, and it's a wonderful kind of sound to hear and almost see the sound waves going through space and time. The other thing with bells in this film is that they focus in a couple of times on the movie theater in Bedford Falls. And what is the movie theater showing? The bells of St. Mary's. So that's a sort of religious inspired film. You've got the name Mary, his wife, there's Mary from the story of Jesus, and you've got the bells. And then there are also, if you see the decorations that are set up around town for Christmas, because it's coming to be Christmas in Bedford Falls, there are actually bells that are some of the decorations. So that's another theme that goes throughout. And just because I want to make sure we get to it, there's another amazing still, and I want to really blow this up bigger. This is at the end of the film, when George has had his transformative experience, when the townspeople have showed up with all of this money. And you'll see between Mary and George In the background, there's a framed, like, it's like butterflies in there that are matted and framed. Now, obviously, the meaning of butterflies, let me see if I can get this smaller here. Maybe I can't, just gotta get rid of it. The meaning of butterflies is transformation. You know, to go from a caterpillar to a butterfly has incredible spiritual connotations. And that exact same picture was present right before George's father, Peter, died in George's father's house. It was behind his father. And then it appears at the very end of the film. And I would say it is absolutely there on purpose. And it's to subliminally, if you will, illustrate transformation. I think that is the point of this film, you know, is awakening, is transformation, going from dark to light, going from physical to non-physical, like going from physical possessions to what it means to have friends and family and love in your heart, and to do acts of service and kindness that reverberate through the world. So I'm just kind of blown away by this film, and like a lot of things, you know, the deeper I dove into it, the more appreciative I became. All right, let's see what else we have here. Let's see, Elizabeth Ruiz is saying, just listening to you, I love to watch this, even on my busy time, because I can see myself to those people around the globe that I make a difference in their lives. Amazing experience, and I'm speechless. That's awesome, Elizabeth. I'm so glad. I am so glad. So Dara is saying, AW, I can understand the addiction to self-esteem, yet Mary was still listening at the end, allowing him the room to awaken himself. Yeah, I mean, I think she is a subtle, but really, really powerful force in his life. And I also think, you know, that like the movie Somewhere in Time that we've discussed here off and on a few times, and we're going to do a spiritual film analysis of that in 2021. The chemistry between those two actors, between Donna Reed and Jimmy Stewart, seems to me to be palpable. I don't know what the real story was in terms of how they got along, but they seem to have real chemistry with each other. And she plays a very powerful role in being kind of like, I don't know, like a moral center for him, and quietly behind the scenes, helping him to function as a human being, and a key person in his transformation. Yeah, Colleen is saying, never noticed the butterflies before. I didn't either. I only noticed it this time because I was watching for, you know, how filmmakers make films. You know, the kinds of things that they embed within the film that is very much like how a hypnotist does things. It is absolutely subliminal. And something subliminal actually has a bigger impact on you emotionally. It is absorbed entirely and fully by your subconscious mind in a way your conscious mind, even if it's aware of it, it doesn't have the same impact as if your conscious mind is not aware of it and you take it in subliminally, emotionally. It lives within you. And this can be done for the light, it can be done for the dark, and it happens all the time. And I just am personally fascinated by where these things come up. You know, I mentioned Platoon before. And there are so many things in that film I hadn't considered, and I'll just mention one of them that comes to mind. That the protagonist is this young soldier, and his name is Chris Taylor. And there are lots of parallels with Jesus. And someone that I was watching on YouTube pointed out that Chris T is Christ. And the experience that he has throughout this film and how it echoes through, these timeless and very powerful stories in our past. I didn't have any clue the first number of times I watched that movie. And once you become aware of this, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that. That's amazing. And I think it's that way with the butterflies. Okay. Carmen Fringer is saying, now it's even more clear why this has always been a favorite film. Thank you. Well, you're welcome, Carmen. You are welcome. Colleen Bailey says, watching this movie, I can feel my heart space expanding every time. Yeah, me too. Me too. And then here is a W. The butterflies in the case have been captured and in a sense thwarted. Could be symbolic of how George feels about his life. Possibly. Hadn't thought about that. I mean, what does absolutely conform to that are birds. So I talked about the raven and how the raven is a symbol of death, and the raven is free. The raven is kind of flying around the savings and loan. Lands on Uncle Billy's shoulder after he loses the $8,000. Well, in multiple scenes, you see birds actually in a cage, kind of like George, trapped inside a cage. So I didn't think about the thing about the butterflies being encased. Very interesting point. But I certainly did notice in a number of scenes before George had his transformation, you see birds inside a cage, trapped inside the cage, which conforms to kind of what you're talking about there. Okay, I want to go back to what time we got there. Okay, I want to go back to some of these other concepts and see if I missed anything here. Oh, it is kind of funny that when George is first taken by Clarence, his guardian angel, his spirit guide, into this alternative lifetime, excuse me, where he is shown what Bedford Falls and all the people he loves, what things would have been like had he never existed. George says, when he's trying to figure out what's happening, and he's still in this place of doubt. So I think that's another theme in this film, is the difference between faith and doubt. And George is kind of at this pinnacle of doubt after all of these things have gone wrong. And now this dumpy old guy, Clarence looks like a dumpy old guy, he doesn't seem particularly smart or anything else, is trying to tell him this sort of fantastical thing, like, I'm your guardian angel, and we're going to bring you into a lifetime as though you had never existed. And George is in a deep, 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 deep state of doubt at that point. And he actually says to Clarence, what are you, a hypnotist? And then at some other point, when he's still in this place of doubt, he says, that guy tried to hypnotize me, which I just think, given my profession, is really kind of funny. And then the bar owner, Nick, it was martinis in George's quote unquote real life. And when he goes into the alternate life, Martini never owns the bar. It's this guy, Nick, who's kind of like, he seems like a thug. And he seems like a representative or emblematic of disbelief, non-believer, where he talks about, get these two pixies out of here. Because all that really matters to Nick is the down and the dirty, the money. I'll give you drinks. I give you, hard drinks to get drunk fast. And I want money in return for it. Just give me the facts. Nothing about faith. His father, so after his father, George's father, Peter, dies, there's a scene in the bank where you can see in the background a picture of George's father, and we stopped the frame because there was something written underneath it. We wanted to read what was written underneath this memoriam to his father, which was one of his quotes, and the quote was, "All you can take with you is that which you've given away." So that kind of good sergeant, bad sergeant in the platoon terms, that's kind of a possibility here, that his father is the representative of the light, and Potter is a representative of the darkness. He's got the death's head on his desk. and that George is kind of, throughout this film, is torn, just like the character in Platoon, between the dark and the light, wanting to be a millionaire, wanting to help people, and he finds his way to the light by the end. The other concept that I came up with is a phrase I heard a long time ago, and it always made a lot of sense to me, and that is hurt people hurt. So Potter obviously is hurt. He's in a wheelchair. And what is he doing? He's hurting people. This is not to excuse him. It is just to observe the phenomenon that hurt people hurt. And maybe even some of you have had a time in your life when you had a really bad headache, or maybe you didn't get enough sleep, or you were really hungry, or part of your body was in pain, and you were short with people. You blew up at somebody, or your fuse was short, or you had a temper. Hurt people hurt. When George is at his nadir and he's kind of romping around his house in a state of desperation, in a state of anger. Why do we have this crummy old house? Why do we have all these kids? Why doesn't anything go the way it is? It's too loud. He has kind of a breakdown. And in this breakdown, he gets violent. And he smashes models and things that the children have built before coming to his senses and kind of apologizing to them. And that's when he leaves and he goes out to drink and then go to the bridge to throw himself off the bridge. The bridge, by the way, being a metaphor, I think, between one place and another place. That like that concept of the fish that has to swim across the sea of consciousness. You have a bridge as a metaphor of going from his old life to his new life. But George is hurting people. He screams at Zuzu's, one of his daughters, at Zuzu's teacher, calls her incompetent. He then goes to the bar, and the husband of the teacher is there and punches him in the mouth, and his mouth starts bleeding. Hurt people hurt, which I think is another big concept in all of this. Let's see if I wrote down anything else. And I wanted to see if there are any other comments here. Let's see here. Gia Girl says, I love that movie. It did have a lot of meaning. Absolutely. Here we go. Colleen says, what do you think is the significance of the end of the banister that always comes off, even though the house has been renovated? Well, the first house my wife and I owned was an 1898 Queen Anne Victorian. So we bought it in 1998 when it was 100 years old. And I can tell you firsthand, that house was in really good shape. We kept it in good shape, but there was always something going wrong with it. And one day I was on the roof of the wraparound porch trying to fix something. And I was like George Bailey, kind of pissed off and resentful that I'm up here having to fix this damn thing. And these two guys walked by, these two contractors, and they said, hey, beautiful house. And I said, thanks a lot, but it's a lot of work. And the guy said to me, he goes, you're living in a work of art. It's not just a house, it's a work of art. And it's always going to need work. So I think from a practical standpoint, and we also know how much money George was making, because Potter went through the whole thing when he said, yeah, you're making about $40 a week. And George goes, no, $45 a week. And that's about $2,000 a year. And Potter offers him $20,000 a year, 10x. Right? And he talks about, hey, when you're all said and done with all your expenses, what do you have, like $10 left over, every week or something like that? And once you have kids, you're not even going to have that. So it's clear that George is not making a lot of money. Maybe he's doing some of the repairs himself to get the house renovated. But, speaking as a young couple when we were in our house, we couldn't afford to do everything at once and bring people in. I had to do a lot of the work myself. Maybe George is in the same place. But it certainly serves as a device of of everything is not perfect in the house, that this thing that keeps coming off on the banister, the finial that keeps coming off, is kind of emblematic of, I never wanted to live in this house in the first place, and look, it's falling apart. And then later when he has his transformation, it's like, yeah, it came off, this is great. And he puts it right back on. Like, isn't this wonderful? I think it's a really powerful moment that illustrates how, as within, so without, how when we change our inner life, the outer life begins to change as well. So really good observation. Dara O'Sullivan. Peter, have you come across the Red Book by Carl Jung? He speaks of his conversation with his inner self. That, like George, only get to realizing toward the end of the movie, but unwillingly at first. I have not read Jung's Red Book, but I should put that on my list to read. Carl Jung was amazing. Can we have a lot of resistance? Absolutely. And I think I've said before on these Friday Lives, I have this phrase called the genius of pain. What I think is the genius of pain, and I don't want to be in pain and I don't want anyone else to be in pain, but it's the human condition. And I think the genius of pain is to, in a way, kind of emphatically invite us to investigate what is causing the pain. And by investigating what's causing the pain, to resolve what has been causing the pain. Because as humans, we don't really want to change. Resistance, right? Our ego doesn't want to admit that we were wrong. Resistance. And yet pain, in all of its forms, physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, spiritual pain, it is inviting us to figure out what's at the root of that pain. Is it a splinter in my toe? Or is it a feeling of worthlessness? And the root could be that splinter. Let me take that out. That's going to hurt, but it's going to feel so much better when it's out. I'm going to be able to walk again. Or is it something that happened to me when I was a child? Or is it something that happened to me in a past lifetime? And when I find that and I resolve it, now I have, in a sense, transformed myself. So yeah, I do think that this is a big part of human existence, and I think that it's part of this film, and it sounds like it's explored in the Red Book. So thank you for mentioning that. Those of you who are new, those of you who haven't done so already, I hope you will consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, Blue Sky Hypnosis. Would love to have you there. And then if you click the bell notification icon, you will be alerted every time I publish new content. Two kinds of content. One is sort of like virtual hypnosis sessions that you can do anytime you want, doesn't cost you anything. And then the other are these Friday Lives, every Friday at 5 p.m. Speaking of which, I want to make this announcement right now. Next Friday, a week from today, is Christmas Day. So even though I love doing these Friday Lives, I couldn't bring myself to doing one on Christmas Day. So next Friday, Christmas Day, we're not going to be doing a live. We'll come back the following week, even though it's New Year's Day, with a Friday Live. So we're going to skip next week, and then we'll be back the following week. Let's see, I want to take maybe a couple more comments, questions, and then we'll call it a weekend. Okay. Oh, cool. AW, I live in a Victorian house too, Peter. Awesome. They're really, I mean, I don't have to tell you, they're absolutely magnificent. I mean, those people had such an attention to detail and quality and so forth. I'm not sure I would ever live in one again, though, unless I had a ton of money, because the upkeep was unbelievable. Like I would go, a 100-year-old house, I'd go in to fix one thing, and I had this joke, it would turn into three. When you open up the plaster, you get in there, and it's like, oh man, there's these other things, and it would take more time, but absolutely gorgeous. And it was kind of a dream when we bought the house to think, oh wow, we're these two people that were actors until recently, and we got a little kid, and now we live in this big, magnificent house. It was an amazing experience. So I'm sure yours is quite beautiful, probably in better shape than ours was, although ours was decent. Okay. Andrea Sheehan, I have never listened to a discussion about this movie like this. It's interesting. I am so glad you're here, Andrea. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I hope you will consider doing that. Hope you come back to the Friday Lives. Remember, next Friday, we're taking it off because it's Christmas Day. but all the other Fridays thereafter, we will be doing our thing. So thanks for being here. Oh yeah, Colleen, I think Mary did most of the work. She loved the house. Remember when she asked George not to break the windows? Yes, I do. I do. So when they were coming back wet from falling into the pool where the floor, receded, and they were dancing at the prom, when they were walking back from that, they walked in front of the house that they ended up buying because Mary said she always loved this house, and George wanted to throw rocks at it. He and his friends would throw rocks to break windows in this abandoned house, and they'd make a wish. So you're right. She loved that house from the beginning. That was her idea, was to be in that house. And I do see her as kind of the foundation of his life. And if it weren't for her, he would have been dead. I'm sure of it. So they made an amazing team, and she really was kind of like a rock. And I think that house and how she transformed the house is probably a whole nother concept you could dive into. So thanks for that observation. I'm just floating down here. AW, I'll be having A&W root beer floats this Christmas. If I get fat, I'll just blame Peter. Definitely blame me for that. And know that you can always go to my YouTube channel, which I'm sure you've been to, and I've got all kinds of things about giving up sugar and losing weight. So, if on January 2nd, anybody out there feels like they added a couple pounds and they don't want them, you can go to the channel and check out that content. There's a lot of it there. Enjoy the eggnog, Dara. And Marie Hogan, I think this is a good one to end today with, says, happy holidays, everyone. May contentment encompass your heart, and may you enjoy simple pleasures each day. So thank you very much for that, Marie. That's a wonderful way of saying to everyone that I hope that you have a Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas with your family, with your friends, that you have a wonderful holiday should you celebrate other holidays, and that this time of year, may this reunite all of us as a world community in peace and in personal freedom. I put up a track not long ago, and it was kind of like my attempt at a Christmas gift to a larger audience. And it's like you sleep, and it starts off where you hear what's being said, and then that fades into subliminal. So it's still being spoken, but it's below the level of being able to hear it consciously. And it's all about world peace and personal freedom. And I feel like, especially at this time, we have reached a point where unity, a bridging, if you will, like the bridge that George was on, a bridging of differences between old and young, between different ethnicities, between different political parties, between different religions, between different philosophies, between different sexual identifications, that this is the time for us as people, not necessarily even as governments, but as people, to unify with each other. So if there is an opportunity, maybe we can think about reaching out to people in our families that we have a quarrel with, or reaching out to a friend that we haven't talked to in a while. I'm not telling you to do this, but maybe just think about it, or to bridge some gulf that has existed. I think that is what we need this holiday season. So thank you all very much for being here. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful holiday next week. I'll miss you guys on Friday of next week, but I will see you the Friday thereafter, which is the 1st of January, 2021. So goodbye and God bless.